"I have never loved her," said the Duke of Yatesbury, "and I do not intend to. Now may we speak of something else?" He heard the sound above him at once, a small dry catch of breath, in the gallery, where nobody was supposed to be at 9:30 in the evening. And he knew, before he looked up, exactly who had made it. Cassia Redmayne was standing at the gallery rail, with the boundary book open in her arms. The drawing-room below her held 11 people, including his aunt, who had asked the question, and who had asked it loudly, in the arch-teasing manner of a woman who believes herself to be doing a kindness. Whether it was true that the Duke had kept a young woman 2 years at Yatesbury copying maps, and whether the county might expect a duchess with ink on her fingers. The gallery was in shadow. Nobody else saw her. She did not speak. She closed the boundary book with great care, as though the noise of it mattered, and went away along the gallery, and the Duke of Yatesbury stood in the middle of his own drawing-room with a glass in his hand, and a sentence in the air that he could not call back. He told himself that night 4 things: that a servant, she was not a servant; that an employee had no business on the gallery stair after 9; that his private affairs were not the property of his aunt; and that in any case he had said nothing untrue. That was the part he examined longest, lying awake at 2 in the morning. He had said nothing untrue. He was 38 years old. He had never in his life used the word love about any living person, not to his mother, not to his brother in the 11 months before Corunna. The word was not in his vocabulary, and he had always taken a certain private pride in the fact. Asked in front of 11 people whether he loved his map copyist, he had reached for the coldest and most correct answer available, and it had been perfectly accurate, and there was no reason at all for the thing that was sitting on his chest. At 7 the next morning, his valet informed him that Miss Redmayne's room was empty. The Duke went up himself. It was a small room over the north passage, and it was very tidy, and it was wrong in every particular. Her cloak was on the peg. Her quarter's wages, £11, in a paper lay on the table untouched, with a note in her small upright hand saying only that she had not earned the last 3 weeks, and did not wish to be pursued for them. Her father's brass instrument case was gone. The boundary book had been left squared to the corner of the table, with a slip of paper marking the place where she had stopped work. And it was the 4th of March, and there had been a wind off the moor all night, and the sky over the Skelmer edge was the color of a dirty sheet. "The mail," said Yatesbury. "She has gone to take the mail from Skelmer." "The mail goes from the Yatesbury turnpike, your grace," said the steward, "at noon. She has only to walk to the lodge. Perhaps she will not go by the lodge. She will not walk down my own avenue past my own gatekeeper with her wages left on the table." He was already going down the stairs. "How far is Skelmer across the moor?" 9 miles, your grace, 10 by the drove line." A pause, and the steward's voice changed. "Your grace, there is snow coming. Barrow has had the sheep in off the top since 5 o'clock. The Duke of Yatesbury stopped on the stairs. He had been in 2 campaigns, and had felt something like this exactly twice, and both times a man had died. "Turn out every soul on this estate," he said. "The stables, the gardens, the farms, the village. I want every man who can sit a horse or walk a moor at the west door in 20 minutes, and I want lanterns, and I want the 2 spare mares saddled, and send to Barrow at High Fold and tell him I am coming for his dogs." He went to fetch the map himself. It was in the library, on the long table where she had worked for 2 years, the great boundary map of the Yatesbury Manors, and beside it the fair copy she had made of it, which was better than the original, because her father had taught her the trick of showing a slope with hatching so fine it looked like breath on glass. The Duke stood over it with his hands on the table edge, and made himself think. She had a compass and a chain book and no cloak. She had left in the dark before 6. She would not take the turnpike, because the turnpike went past his lodge. She would go over the top. And she would not go by the shepherd's path, because he had it suddenly, and it was in her own handwriting on the map in front of him, a line inked in with a note beside it in the margin. Because she had spent all of January walking out the old drove line to settle a dispute about the parish boundary. And she knew it, stone by stone, better than any living person except Barrow. The drove line ran northwest over the highest part of the moor. It was marked by 11 boundary stones. There was nothing on it whatever for 9 miles, but the stones and the sky and one thing. A sheepfold of dry stone, roofless, at the 3rd stone, which she had drawn on her fair copy with a small square, and had labeled in a hand so neat it needed a glass old fold, sound on 3 sides. Sound on 3 sides. She had noticed which sides. The 3rd stone, he said aloud, to an empty library. The snow came at 11 o'clock. It came the way it comes on that moor, not falling but arriving, sideways, out of a sky that had been merely gray for an hour, and turned white all at once. And by noon the drove line was a rumor, and the 11 boundary stones were 11 gray shoulders in a moving blankness, and 30 men were strung out over 2 miles of moor shouting into a wind that took the shouts away downhill. The Duke of Yatesbury went ahead with Barrow and 2 dogs, and a lantern that was no use at all. He got down off the horse at the first stone because the horse could not keep its feet on the frozen ruts, and after that he walked. It was, he estimated afterward, a little over 3 miles from the first stone to the 3rd, and it took 2 hours and 10 minutes, and at some point in the middle of it his thinking narrowed down to a single line and stayed there for the rest of his life. He had said it in front of 11 people. She had been standing on the gallery holding the boundary book. She had closed it carefully so as not to make a noise. "Your Grace," Barrow, bawling into the wind, hauling at his sleeve. "Your Grace, the dog." The dog had gone off the line to the left and was standing at the corner of a wall that was not a wall until you were 4 yards from it, barking at a wedge of drifted snow. Beyond it, sound on 3 sides, roofless, no bigger than a dining room, was the old fold at the 3rd stone. She was in the lee corner, wedged into the angle of the 2 good walls, sitting on her father's instrument case with her back to the stone and her knees up and her arms round them. She had built up the 4th side with loose stones, as high as she could reach, and stuffed the gaps with heather. She had her chain book inside her bodice for the dryness of it. She was gray-white, and her lips had no color, and the snow had drifted to the level of her waist on the windward side. But she looked up. She looked up, and her eyes found him, and she said, in a voice like a rusty hinge, "You should not have come out in this, Your Grace. The wind is northerly. It will drop by dark." The Duke of Yatesbury went down on his knees in the snow of that fold, and could not, for a moment, make himself say anything at all. They could not get her off the moor. Barrow said it plainly. 2 hours down in that wind, carried in wet clothes with the light going, and she would not reach the bottom alive. So they made the fold into a room instead. 9 men came up the line to the 3rd stone with hurdles and a tarpaulin and 4 sheepskins and a horn lantern and the makings of a fire, and they roofed the good corner over and weighted the canvas with stones, and Barrow got a fire going of peat and broken hurdle in the angle of the wall, and by 5 o'clock there was a small hot orange world 4 feet high inside the blizzard. Then Barrow took the men down to high fold, because there was no room for 11 people and no sense in it, and left the Duke of Yatesbury and Cassia Redmayne under a tarpaulin on a moor in the snow, which was scandalous, and which nobody in that parish ever once spoke of in that way, then or afterwards. He got the wet things off her feet and put his own dry stockings on them. He wrapped her in the sheepskins and made her drink the broth out of Barrow's can, and then made her drink it again. For the first hour, she shook so hard that her teeth rattled against the tin, and he held the can for her, and neither of them said anything except the necessary words. In the second hour the shaking stopped, and the color came back into her mouth, and she said, "You will want to know why I went over the top." "I know why, because the turnpike goes past my lodge." "Yes," a breath. "I could not have borne being seen. That is all it was. It was not the walking. I have walked it 4 times. I have walked it in January with my father's chain and got wet to the knees and thought nothing of it. It was only that if Hobbs at the lodge had said good morning to me, I should have cried, and then he would have told the kitchen that I cried, and then she stopped. It is a small reason to nearly die for." "It is not a small reason." The Duke turned a Pete over with the toe of his boot. "Miss Redmayne, I said a thing last night in front of 11 people." "You said what was true." "That is what I told myself at 2 o'clock this morning, and I told myself for 4 hours, and it lasted very well until I saw the £11 on your table." He kept his eyes on the fire, because it was easier. "Then I went out on that moor, and somewhere between the first stone and the third, I stopped being able to tell myself anything at all." Cassia Redmayne sat very still in her sheepskins. "My aunt asked me whether I loved you," he said, "in front of a room, as a joke to make 11 people laugh, and I have been asked a great many hostile questions in my life, and I have never yet answered one, so I did what I have done since I was 19 years old. I took the coldest sentence available and I put it in her way to stop her, and I did not think about you at all until I heard the book shut." He looked up. "That is not a noble reason. I want to be exact about it, because you have a right to the exact reason and not a flattering one. I did not deny it to protect you. I denied it because I was asked in public, and I have never once in my life said the word love out loud, and it was easier to be cold in front of my aunt than to be seen." The fire popped. The wind went over the top of the tarpaulin like something running. "And is it true?" she said. "No," said the Duke of Yatesbury. He heard her breath go. "I have thought about you every day for 11 months, he said. "I moved my correspondence into the library in May and told my steward it was the light. It was not the light. It was that you hum when you are hatching a slope, and I discovered that I could not work in a room where you were not humming. I have read every note in the margin of that fair copy a dozen times over, and I know your hand better than my own, and this morning that is what saved you, not my horses and not my 30 men, but a square drawn a quarter of an inch wide with old fold, sound on 3 sides written beside it in a hand I could pick out of 1,000. His voice was not steady, and he let it not be. "So no, it is not true. It is the one entirely false sentence I have spoken in 20 years, and I chose to speak it in front of 11 witnesses, and there is nothing in that fold, Miss Redmayne, that I would not give to have it back." Cassia Redmayne put her face down on her drawn-up knees, and her shoulders shook, and it had nothing to do with the cold. He did not touch her. He sat on the other side of the fire with his back against the third boundary stone and kept the peat going, and at some hour after midnight, he heard her breathing change and go slow and easy, and he sat awake till daylight watching a wall of falling snow turn from black to gray. The wind dropped before dawn, exactly as she had said it would. They came up at first light with a hurdle and 8 men and a great deal of blankets, and carried her down to High Fold and then to the house, and there was a fortnight of fever and a physician from York, who was paid a shocking sum and did very little, and Barrow's wife, who did everything and would not be thanked for it. The Duke of Yatesbury came every day to the door of that room, and every day did not go in, and sent up books, and asked the same question of the same maid 4 times a day for 14 days. On the 15th day she was sitting up and would see him. "There is something you must do," said Cassia Redmayne, "before anything else is said at all, and you will not like it." "Name it." "The same room, the same people." She was very thin and her voice was still ruined and her chin was perfectly level. "Your aunt and Lady Paget and the Anstruthers and the 2 clergymen, and every one of the 11 at the same hour of the evening, with the candles lit as they were lit. Because they all heard you say it, Gideon, and 11 people in this county, have spent a fortnight telling the story of the map copyist who ran onto the moor, and there is not one of them who does not privately believe that I did it to be pursued." Her hands closed on the counterpane. "I will not have it whispered. If you meant what you said in that fold, then say the true thing where you said the false one, and I shall be able to walk into any drawing-room in England for the rest of my life." "Very well," said the Duke of Yatesbury. "You are not to make a speech about the snow. They will only enjoy it." "I shall not mention the snow." He did it on the 9th of April, at 9:30 in the evening, with the candles lit as they had been lit. He stood in the middle of the drawing-room in front of the same 11 people, and said that on the 3rd of March, in that room at that hour, he had been asked a question by his aunt, and had answered it with a lie. That the lie was that he had never loved Miss Cassia Redmayne, and did not intend to. That in fact he had loved her since the previous spring, entirely without her knowledge, and without one word of encouragement from her. That she had left his house without her wages, and without her cloak sooner than be pitied by his gatekeeper. And that he had asked her that afternoon to be his wife, and she had, upon conditions, and after keeping him waiting a very long quarter of an hour, consented. "I have said it here," he finished, "because I did the other thing here. You may talk of it as much as you please. I would take it as a kindness if you would talk of it a great deal." His aunt, to her eternal credit, was the first on her feet. They were married in June. The bride walked into the church on the arm of a shepherd named Barrow, who wore a new coat and was so frightened that he had to be steadied twice, and who gave her away because, as she said to anybody who asked, there was one man on that moor whose dog had found her, and she was not going to be given away by anybody less. The fair copy of the boundary map hangs in the great hall at Yatesbury still, glazed, in a plain frame. It is a famous piece of work. A society in London asked to have it engraved, and was refused. If you look at the northwest corner, at the 3rd stone on the drove line, you will find a small square drawn 1/4 of an inch wide, and beside it in a very neat hand, old fold, sound on 3 sides, and underneath that, in a larger, blacker, altogether less elegant hand, added afterwards, and rather crookedly, as though written by a man who had never in his life been able to say a thing except in ink. Here I told her the truth.